The crystal chandeliers of the orchid ballroom didn't just illuminate the room. They magnified every lie. They cast a harsh, unforgiving light on Seraphina Vale's perfectly curated smile, a smile that felt as fragile as the champagne flute in her hand. Her husband, Dominic Renford, stood a few feet away, a titan of industry encased in a bespoke tuxedo, his laughter booming across the marble floors. But he wasn't laughing with her. He was laughing with Sloane Whitmore, whose scarlet dress was a slash of defiance against the ballroom's genteel decor. Seraphina felt a familiar, cold dread coiling in her stomach, a dread that had nothing to do with the life growing inside her, and everything to do with the man who put it there. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. If emotional stories speak to you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss this one. Let's dive into it. The air in the orchid ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Renford Enterprises Philanthropy Gala, the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar. For Seraphina, it was the yearly performance review of her role as Mrs. Dominic Renford. She had to be elegant, attentive, and above all, invisible in her radiance. Tonight, however, invisibility was not an option. Her hand rested instinctively on the gentle swell of her belly, a 5-month secret she had been cherishing like a hidden pearl. It was the only thing that felt real in her gilded cage. She had planned to tell Dominic tonight, to finally see a flicker of the man she had married, not the cold monolith he had become. Dominic's voice, a low rumble of amusement, cut through the polite chatter. He was with Sloane, his hand resting on the small of her back with an intimacy that was a public declaration. Sloane, his star VP of acquisitions, was sharp, ambitious, and everything Seraphina was not. Her eyes, the color of expensive whiskey, met Seraphina's across the room, and they held a glint of undisguised triumph. Seraphina felt the blood drain from her face. This was different. This wasn't the usual boardroom flirtation or the late-night meetings. This was a coronation. Sloane was being crowned, and Seraphina was the relic being deposed. Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, she walked towards them. Her heels clicked a funereal rhythm on the polished floor. The conversations around them didn't stop, but they lowered, a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that signaled impending drama. Dominic, Seraphina's voice was softer than she intended, a fragile bird in a storm. May I have a word with you? Dominic turned, his smile tightening. It was the smile he used on hostile board members, not his wife. Seraphina, can't you see I'm busy? It's important, she insisted, her gaze flicking to Sloane's proprietary smirk. Sloane leaned in, her red lips close to Dominic's ear. Don't let her make a scene, darling. It's so unbecoming. The word darling was a perfectly aimed dart. It hit Seraphina with physical force. I would like to speak to my husband, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. Alone. Dominic's face darkened. The power imbalance in their marriage was a chasm, and she had just dared to shout across it. Whatever you have to say, you can say right here. It was a test, a public execution of her dignity. Seraphina looked at the faces around them, a gallery of feigned indifference. They were sharks smelling blood. She took a deep breath, the scent of lilies suddenly cloying. Fine, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. Not in a million years. "I'm pregnant, Dominic." The words hung in the air, suddenly silencing the nearby whispers. Sloane's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Dominic's face went blank, a mask of cold fury replacing his irritation. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "We're having a baby," she repeated, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Please, see me. Remember us." Sloane let out a small theatrical gasp. "Oh, Dominic, is this her latest attempt to trap you? How predictable. Trap me." Dominic's gaze was glacial. He looked at Seraphina's belly, not with wonder, but with revulsion, as if she were carrying a disease. "You think a child will fix this? You think it absolves you?" "Absolves me of what?" Seraphina's confusion was genuine. "What have I done but love you?" "You've become a weight, Seraphina," he hissed, stepping closer, his towering frame casting her in shadow. "A beautiful, expensive weight I can no longer afford to carry." The cruelty was so profound, it left her breathless. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She saw the flash of satisfaction in Sloane's. "Don't you dare cry," Dominic commanded. "Don't you dare play the victim here." And then, with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no, who believed the world was his to command and everyone in it a subject, he raised his hand. The sound of the slap was a gunshot in the cathedral of wealth. It wasn't a brutal fist-swinging blow, but something far more insidious. It was a sharp, stinging crack of palm against cheek, an act of utter humiliation designed to shatter, not just injure. The force of it snapped Seraphina's head to the side. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The music seemed to stutter and die. Time slowed. Seraphina felt the imprint of his fingers on her skin, a brand of shame that burned hotter than any physical pain. The chandeliers seemed to sway. Her first thought wasn't for herself. It was for the tiny, fragile life inside her. A wave of terror, fierce and maternal, washed over her. She lifted her head, her cheek blazing red, but her eyes were clear. The tears were gone, replaced by a terrifying, desolate calm. She looked at Dominic, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man she loved, the man she had sacrificed her own ambitions and identity for, was gone. In his place stood this monster, his face contorted in a mask of rage. She didn't say a word. She didn't scream or sob. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. With a dignity that felt wrenched from the very depths of her soul, she turned and walked away. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of pity, shock, and morbid curiosity. As she walked out of the orchid ballroom, leaving behind the wreckage of her life, Dominic stood frozen, his hand still tingling. He felt a momentary, hollow victory, the kind a bully feels after a conquest. Sloane slid her arm through his, her voice a triumphant purr. "She's finally gone. Now we can begin." Dominic nodded, but he couldn't tear his eyes from the empty doorway his wife had just disappeared through. He had won. He had asserted his dominance, but he didn't know. He didn't know that the slap was more than an act of cruelty. He didn't know that for his pregnant wife, a sudden, violent jolt of shock and adrenaline was not just a trauma, but a potential death sentence. He didn't know that Serafina was keeping a secret far more profound than her pregnancy, a secret tucked away in the faulty, fragile chambers of her own heart. He didn't know that he hadn't just slapped his wife. He had just armed her with the one thing she never had before. The absolute, unwavering certainty that she had to save herself. The click of the heavy oak door shutting behind her was the sound of a chapter ending. Serafina didn't hail a cab. She walked. The cold night air was a balm on her burning cheek, each step on the unforgiving pavement, a rhythm pulling her further from the woman she used to be. The city lights blurred into watercolor streaks through the unshed tears that now clouded her vision. Her hand never left her stomach. "I'm sorry," she thought, the words a silent prayer to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry I chose him. I won't make that mistake again." Her feet carried her on autopilot, not to the palatial, sterile penthouse she shared with Dominic, but to a quiet, tree-lined street in a different part of town. She stopped before a modest brownstone with a single light glowing in a second-floor window. This was her only sanctuary. She pressed the buzzer. A moment later, a warm voice, laced with concern, crackled through the speaker. "Serafina, is that you? It's past midnight." "Mira, please," Serafina whispered, her voice finally breaking. "I need you." The door buzzed open instantly. Serafina climbed the stairs, her legs feeling like lead. Dr. Mira Sethi stood at the top, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her kind face etched with worry. She was wearing scrubs, having clearly just returned from a long shift. Mira wasn't just Serafina's cardiologist. She was the sole keeper of her most terrifying secret. Mira saw the red mark on Serafina's cheek, and her expression shifted from concern to a quiet, controlled fury. She didn't ask. She simply wrapped her arms around Serafina, guiding her inside her cozy, book-filled apartment. "Sit," she said gently, leading Serafina to a plush armchair. "I'll get you some water." As Mira moved to the kitchen, Serafina's composure finally crumbled. Sobs racked her body, raw and agonizing. They were not just for the slap, but for the years of quiet erosion, the slow death of her spirit she had mistaken for marital compromise. Mira returned, not with water, but with a blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope. She knelt before Serafina, her touch professional and reassuring. "Breathe with me, Serafina. Deep, slow breaths. That's it. Tell me what happened." Between gasps, Serafina recounted the scene at the gala. The public humiliation, Sloane's triumph, the coldness in Dominic's eyes, and finally, the slap. Mira's jaw tightened as she listened, her eyes flashing with anger. She finished taking Serafina's vitals, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Your pressure is dangerously high, and your heart rate. It's a chaotic rhythm. We call it arrhythmia. The shock could have triggered it." She looked Serafina directly in the eye, her voice firm but gentle. "This is what I warned you about, Serafina. Stress is your enemy. A shock like that. It's poison for your condition." The condition? The secret. Peripartum cardiomyopathy. It was a rare form of heart failure that occurred during the last month of pregnancy, or up to 5 months after giving birth. For Serafina, the diagnosis had come early, a shadow lurking behind the joy of her pregnancy. Her heart muscle, weakened and enlarged, was struggling to handle the increased blood volume of carrying a child. Mira had been unequivocal. The pregnancy was high risk. She needed a serene, stress-free environment. Bed rest would likely be required in the 3rd trimester. A violent, emotional shock was the worst possible scenario. I was going to tell him. Serafina wept, clutching Mira's hand. I thought the baby. I thought it would change things. That he would remember the man he was when we met. That man is gone, Serafina, Mira said softly, but with unshakable conviction. Or maybe he was never really there. Narcissists are brilliant actors. Mira had been against her keeping the condition from Dominic. He's the father, she had argued weeks ago. He has a right to know the risk you're taking. But Serafina had refused. Telling Dominic would mean giving him more power, another vulnerability to exploit. He would see it as a weakness, a flaw in his perfect life. He might have even pressured her to terminate, to remove the problem. This baby was hers, her risk, her hope. She would not let his darkness tarnish it. "What do we do now?" Serafina asked, her voice small. "First, we stabilize you," Mira said, switching into doctor mode. "I want to monitor you for the next few hours. Then, we make a plan. You cannot go back to him. Not for a night. Do you understand me? This is no longer about your happiness. It's about your survival. And the survival of your baby." The word survival landed with grim finality. The fantasy was over. This was the reality. Her husband, the man she had promised to love in sickness and in health, was the sickness. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Dominic poured himself a second tumbler of Macallan 25. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving a sour, unsettling residue. The sprawling apartment, usually a testament to his success, felt cavernous and empty. Sloane was there, draped over a leather sofa, scrolling through her phone, but her presence was a sharp, grating note in the silence. "The board is going to love the press from the gala," she said, not looking up. "Pledged donations broke last year's record." Dominic didn't respond. He swirled the amber liquid, the image of Serafina's face, shocked, betrayed, and then chillingly calm, seared into his mind. He had expected hysterics. The quiet dignity of her exit was more unnerving than any screaming match. "She'll come crawling back," Sloane said, sensing his mood. "They always do. She has nowhere to go. Everything she is, you gave her. You gave her." The words echoed in his head. He had given her a name, a lifestyle, a pedestal. But what had he taken away? He remembered the Serafina he'd first met. She was an architectural historian, brilliant and passionate, her eyes lighting up when she talked about forgotten buildings. He had loved that light. But slowly, subtly, he had snuffed it out, demanding her world shrink to fit his. Her career became a hobby, then a memory. Her friends were replaced by the wives of his business associates. He pushed the thought away. It was a weakness. Sentimentality was a liability in his world. "Her lawyers will be in touch, I imagine," Dominic said, his voice hard. "Let them," Sloane scoffed. "Our prenup is ironclad. She gets her settlement, and we get our lives back." Dominic walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering city. He was the king of this skyline. He had crushed competitors, bent markets to his will, and fired people without a second thought. He was in control. So why did he feel a profound sense of loss? Why did the slap, an act of ultimate control, feel like he had just detonated a bomb in his own foundations? He had slapped his pregnant wife. He said the words to himself, testing their weight. They felt ugly, brutish, not the actions of a master of the universe, but of a common thug. He tried to justify it. She had provoked him. She had embarrassed him. She had tried to trap him. But the excuses felt thin, like cheap fabric stretched over a jagged hole. He didn't know that miles away, his wife was hooked up to an EKG machine in her doctor's apartment, her heart's erratic rhythm a frantic testament to his rage. He didn't know that the single, violent act was the catalyst not for her return, but for her disappearance. He had meant to put her in her place, but instead he had set her free. And in doing so, he had unknowingly lit the fuse on the immolation of his own carefully constructed world. 3 days passed. 3 days of absolute silence from Serafina. It was a silence that grew louder with each passing hour, gnawing at the edges of a Dominic's composure. He expected a tearful phone call, a summons from a high-powered divorce attorney, a dramatic confrontation. He got nothing. Her closets were still full of designer clothes. Her car was in the garage. Her personal bank account, which he funded, was untouched. It was as if she had stepped out of the ballroom and simply evaporated. "She's playing a game," Sloane insisted over dinner at a chic minimalist restaurant. "She wants you to panic, to come looking for her, so she can set the terms." Dominic nodded, but he wasn't convinced. This wasn't Serafina's style. Her methods were always direct, her emotions transparent. This quiet, vanishing act was unnervingly strategic. It was the move of a different woman. His frustration began to curdle into a strange, obsessive need to find her. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. She had defied him, slipped through his grasp, and his entire psyche was built on the premise that nothing and no one slipped through his grasp. He hired a private investigator, a discreet bulldog of a man named Marcus Thorne, who had previously done corporate espionage for him. "Find her," Dominic commanded, his voice clipped. "I want to know where she is, who she's with, what she's planning. I want to know what she had for breakfast. Total surveillance." "Understood, Mr. Renford," Thorne said, his face impassive. While Thorne's men began their hunt, Dominic tried to immerse himself in work. But the company, once his kingdom, now felt like a distraction. During a high-stakes negotiation over a new tech merger, he found his mind drifting. He pictured Serafina's face. He replayed the slap in his mind, the sound of it echoing in the silent boardroom. For the first time, a sliver of genuine shame pierced his armor of arrogance. Sloane, meanwhile, was flourishing. With Serafina gone, she seamlessly slid into the role of the woman by Dominic's side. She redecorated a guest room, her clothes appearing in the wardrobe. She advised him on business, her insights sharp and ruthless. She was the perfect partner for the man he was supposed to be. Yet her presence felt hollow. Her ambition, which had once seemed thrilling, now felt rapacious. "I've been reviewing the Henderson acquisition files," she said one evening, her laptop glowing in the dim light of the penthouse. "Their patent portfolio is undervalued. If we trigger a hostile takeover now, we could absorb them for pennies on the dollar." It was a brilliant, predatory move. The old Dominic would have relished it. The current Dominic just grunted in response, his mind elsewhere. He was thinking about Seraphina's favorite place, a small, dusty bookstore in the West Village she used to drag him to. He wondered if she was there. Thorne's first report came back a week later. It was a folder full of negatives. "She's a ghost, Mr. Renford," Thorne said over the phone. "No credit card activity. No phone usage. The device is off. Her known friends haven't seen her. Her family, that distant cousin in Oregon, hasn't heard from her. We've checked airports, train stations, car rentals. Nothing. It's like she walked into a black hole." "That's impossible," Dominic snapped. "She's not a spy. She's my wife. Find something." "There is one anomaly," Thorne said, his voice hesitant. "We ran a check on her medical records, just a routine background sweep. There's a flag. Her files are sealed, heavily encrypted, not just doctor-patient confidentiality. This is a digital fortress. It would take a court order or a top-tier hacker to get in." Dominic froze. Medical files? Seraphina was perfectly healthy. The occasional checkup, a flu shot. Why would her records be sealed? "What kind of doctor?" Dominic demanded. "A cardiologist," Thorne replied. "Dr. Mira Sethi, top of her field at New York Presbyterian." Cardiologist. The word made no sense. Seraphina had no heart condition. Or did she? He mentally scrolled through their years together. Had there been signs he'd missed? Moments of fatigue he'd dismissed as laziness? Shortness of breath he'd attributed to a lack of fitness? A cold wave of unease washed over him. Seraphina, meanwhile, was miles away, tucked into a small, rented cottage on the coast of Maine, arranged by Mira through a network of doctors who specialized in helping patients escape abusive situations. The air smelled of salt and pine, a clean, sharp scent that was the antithesis of the cloying lilies in the orchid ballroom. The cottage was simple, furnished with mismatched but comfortable furniture. For the first week she had done nothing but sleep, the deep, exhausted sleep of a soldier coming off the line. Mira called twice a day, monitoring her symptoms remotely through a medical-grade smartwatch that tracked her heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. Slowly, Seraphina began to heal. The red mark on her cheek faded, but the internal shift was permanent. The fear was still there, a constant low hum, but it was now overlaid with a steely resolve. She was no longer just a victim. She was a mother, protecting her child. She began to document everything. She wrote down every instance of Dominic's emotional abuse, his controlling behavior, his gaslighting. She detailed his financial dealings, the off-the-books consulting fees he'd bragged about, the ruthless tactics he'd used to crush smaller companies. She had been a silent witness to his empire building, and she had absorbed more than he ever realized. The architectural historian's mind, trained to see the structural integrity or weakness in buildings, now saw the cracks in Dominic's corporate facade. She was not building a case for a larger settlement. She was building a lifeboat, a way to ensure that Dominic could never touch her or her child again. "Are you sure you want to do this, Seraphina?" Mira asked during one of their calls. "Poking the bear could be dangerous." "He left me no choice, Mira," Seraphina replied, her voice steady. She looked out the window at the grey, churning ocean. "He thinks I'm a ghost, but a ghost can still haunt." Back in New York, Dominic was becoming a hunter, obsessed with his prey. He sat in his car outside Dr. Mira Sethi's brownstone, a place Thorne's report had flagged as her residence. He watched for 2 nights. On the 3rd night, he saw Dr. Sethi leave, getting into a taxi. On impulse, he followed. The taxi led him to a high-end pharmacy. He watched as the doctor went inside and came out with a small paper bag. It was nothing, and yet it felt like something. What medication would a cardiologist pick up for a ghost? His obsession was now a full-blown inferno. He needed to know what was in those sealed files. He needed to understand the secret Serafina was keeping. The power in their relationship had always been his. Her sudden autonomy, her complete disappearance, felt like a fundamental law of his universe had been broken. He had no idea that in his desperate hunt to reclaim his power, he was about to uncover a truth that would strip him of every last vestige of it. Dominic's obsession with the sealed medical files became the single focal point of his existence. The Henderson acquisition, once a thrilling corporate conquest, now felt like a tedious chore. He delegated more and more to Sloane, whose ambition happily filled the vacuum he created. She saw his distraction as a byproduct of the messy divorce, a temporary weakness she could exploit for her own advancement. She had no idea it was the beginning of his unraveling. Dominic, a man who believed money could solve any problem, decided to bypass legal channels. Through Thorne, he hired a hacker, a shadowy figure known only as Nix. The price was exorbitant, the ethics non-existent. Dominic didn't care. "I want to know what's in Dr. Sethi's file on Serafina Vale," Dominic instructed Thorne. "Every test result, every diagnosis, every note." 2 days later, Thorne called. His voice was different, stripped of its usual professional detachment. It was hesitant, almost somber. "We have it. The file is open. I think you need to see this for yourself, Mr. Renford. I'm sending a courier." An hour later, a slim, encrypted tablet was delivered to Dominic's private office. He locked the door, his heart hammering in a way he wasn't used to. He opened the file. The screen was filled with medical terminology he didn't understand. Ejection fraction, LV dysfunction, cardiomegaly. But then he started reading Dr. Sethi's clinical notes, and the world tilted on its axis. Patient, Serafina Vale. Diagnosis, peripartum cardiomyopathy, PPCM. Condition discovered at 19 weeks gestation. Severe weakening of the heart muscle. Patient's ejection fraction is at a critical 30%. He scrolled down, his breathing growing shallow. The patient is at extremely high risk for fatal arrhythmia, blood clots, and progressive heart failure, exacerbated by the physiological stress of the pregnancy. Any significant emotional or physical shock could trigger a catastrophic cardiac event. Stress reduction is not a recommendation. It is a clinical necessity for survival. Shock. The word screamed at him from the screen. He saw the orchid ballroom. He heard the gunshot crack of his hand against her cheek. He saw her head snap to the side. A catastrophic cardiac event. He kept reading, his hands trembling. Patient has been repeatedly advised of the grave risks of continuing the pregnancy. She has refused termination, expressing a profound desire for this child. Patient also refused to inform her husband, Mr. Dominic Renford, citing concerns over his potential reaction, fearing emotional coercion and a lack of support. She believes the stress of his reaction would be more detrimental than keeping the secret. The final sentences hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't kept the secret to deceive him. She had kept it to protect herself. And the baby, from him. His cruelty wasn't just a character flaw, it was a quantifiable medical risk. The air was punched from his lungs. He felt a wave of nausea so intense he had to grip his desk to keep from falling. The slap. Oh God, the slap. It wasn't just an act of humiliation in front of his mistress. It was a potential murder weapon. He had stood there, puffed up with his own pathetic ego, while his wife, his fragile, sick wife, who was risking her life to carry his child, absorbed a blow that could have stopped her heart. The shame was a physical entity, a black viscous liquid filling his chest, choking him. The image of Seraphina's calm, clear eyes as she walked away was recontextualized. It wasn't dignity in the face of insult. It was the terrifying calm of someone who had just survived a near-death experience. He was still staring at the screen, his world reduced to medical text, when the door to his office burst open. It was Sloane, her face flushed with a strange, manic energy he'd never seen before. "Dominic, you need to see this," she said, her voice high and triumphant. She wasn't asking for permission. "Get out," he rasped, trying to shield the tablet. "No, you don't understand." She strode to his desk, throwing a stack of papers down. "It's done. The board just voted. The motion passed." "What motion?" Dominic asked, his mind a fog of medical dread. "The motion to remove you as CEO, effective immediately," she said, a cruel, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "On the grounds of gross negligence and erratic behavior. Your distraction over your little domestic drama has been very, very useful." Dominic stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? I control the board." "Not anymore," Sloane said, her voice dropping, losing its purr and gaining a razor's edge. "For the last 2 years, I have been acquiring shares through shell corporations. I've been making alliances. The Henderson deal you handed me, the final piece. Their block of shares, combined with mine and our new allies, gives me a controlling interest." It was impossible. A corporate coup of this magnitude. It was unthinkable. "Why?" he managed to ask, the word barely a whisper. "I gave you everything." Sloane's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a grief so old and so cold it chilled the room. "You didn't give me anything, Dominic. You took everything from my sister." "Your sister?" "Amelia Whitmore," Sloane said, her voice trembling with repressed fury. "Does that name mean anything to you? Or was she just another beautiful thing you acquired and then discarded when she became inconvenient?" Amelia. The name hit him like a ghost from a past he had buried deep. His college girlfriend. Fiery, passionate Amelia, who had died in a car crash. A crash that had happened after he had broken up with her, callously and coldly, because her emotional intensity was becoming too much for his budding ambitions. "Amelia, she was your sister," Dominic whispered, the second revelation of the day completing his demolition. "My big sister," Sloane bit out, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She worshipped you, and you broke her. The night she died, she called me from her car, sobbing, hysterical, because you had dumped her. She was distracted, heartbroken. You think that slap was bad? You should have heard what you did to her spirit. You killed her just as surely as if you had been driving the car. Everything clicked into place. Her ambition, her ruthlessness, her calculated seduction. It was never about love or money. It was about revenge. A long, patient, meticulous revenge plot to dismantle his life, piece by piece, just as he had dismantled her sister's. "I've wanted this for 10 years, Dominic," she said, her voice a low, chilling whisper. "To see you with nothing. To see the look on your face when the empire you built on the bones of other people crumbles. You slapped your pregnant wife in public? Perfect. A beautiful, self-inflicted wound to cap it all off." She leaned over the desk, her face close to his. "Your company is mine. Your reputation is in ruins. And your wife, the one carrying your heir, the one you almost killed. She's gone. You have nothing." Sloane stood up straight, all traces of emotion gone, replaced by the cold mask of a CEO. "Security will escort you out. Your personal effects will be sent to your home. Goodbye, Dominic." She turned and walked out, leaving him in the silent, opulent office that was no longer his. He was surrounded by the trappings of power, but he had never been more powerless. He looked at the tablet in his hands, at the clinical diagnosis of Serafina's broken heart, and then at the papers on his desk, the clinical execution of his corporate life. He hadn't just lost his company. He hadn't just been played by the ghost of a past sin. He had discovered that he was the villain in every story, a monster of his own making. And the woman he had brutalized wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor of a war he never even knew she was fighting. He had hit rock bottom, only to find that the floor was a trap door leading to an even deeper darkness. The days that followed were a descent into a grey, soundless hell. Dominic found himself a prisoner in the penthouse, a glass castle that now felt like a mausoleum for the man he used to be. The news of his ousting was a brutal public spectacle. News headlines screamed his downfall. Renford forced out in shocking takeover, from titan to pariah, CEO's Mistress revealed as mastermind. His name, once a synonym for power, was now a punchline. His phone, once a relentless torrent of calls from the most powerful people in the country, was silent. His business associates, the ones who had laughed at his jokes and accepted his largesse, now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a leper. But the public humiliation was a dull ache compared to the sharp, stabbing agony of the truth about Serafina. The tablet with her medical file became a sacred, terrible text. He read it over and over, the words branding themselves onto his soul. High risk, catastrophic cardiac event. She refused to inform her husband, fearing his reaction. He was the risk factor. He was the disease. The ghost of Amelia Whitmore, summoned by Sloane's revelation, now shared the penthouse with him. He remembered her raw, unedited love and his youthful terror of it. He had crushed her spirit with the same casual cruelty he had later perfected on Serafina. He saw now that his entire life had been a frantic, ruthless effort to build walls around his own heart, to control everything and everyone, so he would never have to feel that vulnerable again. In the end, his walls hadn't protected him. They had only ensured he would be alone when they inevitably crumbled. He drank. At first, it was the expensive scotch, but when that ran out, he moved to cheaper whiskey. The burn in his throat, a welcome distraction from the burn in his soul. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just sat in the dark, watching the city lights, the kingdom he had lost. One night, shattered and drunk, he found himself in Serafina's walk-in closet. Her scent, a faint, clean smell of lavender and vanilla, still lingered. He ran his hand over a soft cashmere sweater and collapsed onto the floor, the first sober, genuine tears of his adult life tracking paths through the stubble on his face. He wasn't crying for his lost company or his shattered reputation. He was crying for the good man he might have been. He was crying for the gentle, brilliant woman he had systematically broken. He was crying for his unborn child, who was growing inside a mother whose life he had endangered. A child he would likely never know. This was his rock bottom, a place of absolute desolation. And it was here, in the suffocating darkness of his wife's empty closet, that the first glimmer of something other than self-pity sparked. It wasn't hope. It was a terrifying, humbling sense of responsibility. Penance. He stopped drinking. He took a shower. He looked at his haggard face in the mirror and saw the monster Sloane had described. He had to do something. Not to win Serafina back. He knew with bone-deep certainty that he had forfeited that right forever. Not to fix things, because some things, once shattered, could never be made whole. He had to do something, because it was the only way to prove to himself that a fragment of a decent man still existed somewhere inside the wreckage. In the salty air of the Maine coast, Serafina was entering her third trimester. Her belly was round and full, a constant, reassuring presence. Life had found a quiet rhythm. Mornings were for walks on the rocky beach, afternoons for her research into Dominic's corporate web, and evenings for reading to her baby, her voice soft and steady. Mira had arranged for a local OB-GYN and a cardiologist to take over her care. The reports were sent back to Mira daily. Serafina's condition was stable, but the final weeks were the most perilous. The strain on her heart was immense. Bed rest was now mandatory. She had followed the news of Dominic's downfall with a strange sense of detachment. She saw Sloane's vengeance for what it was, a tragedy born of another tragedy. It brought Serafina no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for all the lives broken by one man's fear of love. Her legal team, funded by a small trust her parents had left her, had quietly filed for divorce. They were building a case to ensure her and her child's financial independence, using the information she had painstakingly compiled. She was no longer Serafina Renford, the appendage. She was Serafina Vale, a mother and a survivor, fighting for her future. She rarely thought of Dominic the man anymore. She thought of him as a force, a storm she had weathered. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the baby kicked, she would feel a pang of sorrow. Her child would never know the fantasy she'd once had. A loving father, a happy home. She mourned the dream, even as she fought for the reality. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was from an anonymous sender, postmarked from New York. Wary, she had her lawyer's contact vet it before she opened it. Inside was a single document. It was a deed. The document transferred sole, unencumbered ownership of a historic brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a building she had once told Dominic was her favorite in all of New York, a place she had dreamed of restoring to her. A separate bank statement showed a multi-million-dollar trust fund had been established, with her unborn child as the sole beneficiary. The fund was irrevocable. There was no note, no explanation. But Serafina knew. It wasn't a gift to win her back. It was an apology, an act of penance made in silence. It was the first thing Dominic had done in years that wasn't about control, but about letting go. She held the deed, her fingers tracing the legal language. It didn't change anything between them. The wound was too deep. But it was a signal, a sign that the monster who had slapped her in the ballroom was perhaps finally confronting himself in the ruins of his life. For the first time, she allowed herself a sliver of hope, not for him or for them, but for the possibility that her child's father might one day become a man she would not have to be ashamed of. The first contraction was a sharp, tightening wave that stole Serafina's breath. It was 3 a.m. The world outside her cottage window was a canvas of deep indigo and silver starlight. Her heart, a weary soldier, immediately began to hammer an erratic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. The final, most dangerous battle. Mira had a protocol in place. The local medical team was alerted. An ambulance, lights off to avoid panic, arrived within minutes. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, Serafina's hand instinctively went to her belly. "Stay with me," she whispered to her baby. "We're almost there." The birth was a harrowing, delicate dance between obstetrics and cardiology. The delivery room was a hushed, tense theatre of beeping machines and focused professionals. Serafina's cardiologist stood beside her obstetrician, their eyes constantly flicking between Serafina and the monitors, displaying her heart's frantic, struggling protest. Serafina fought. She pushed through waves of pain, focusing on Mira's voice, which cut through the fog, guiding her, encouraging her. She was fighting not just the physical agony of a childbirth, but the terror of her own fragile body. Every ounce of her will was focused on one single outcome: bringing her child into the world safely. And then, after hours that felt like a lifetime, a new sound filled the room. A powerful, healthy cry. "It's a girl, Serafina," the obstetrician announced, his voice thick with relief. "She's beautiful." They laid the tiny, squirming baby on Serafina's chest. A wave of love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed everything else. The pain, the fear, the memory of Dominic washed over her. She looked at her daughter's perfect, wrinkled face and wept, tears of exhaustion, relief, and pure, unadulterated joy. She had done it. They had survived. She named her hope. Miles away, Dominic knew nothing of the drama unfolding in a Maine hospital. He had spent the last 2 months systematically dismantling his old life. He sold the penthouse, the cars, the watches. He put the money, every last cent that Sloane's corporate coup hadn't tied up, into the trust for his child. He kept only enough to live a simple, anonymous life. His penance was not just financial, it was personal. He sought out a therapist, a gruff, no-nonsense man who forced him to confront the deep-seated fears that had fueled his narcissism. He started volunteering at a soup kitchen, the act of serving others a humbling, alien experience. He was learning to live without the armor of wealth and power, and for the first time, he felt the faint stirrings of an authentic self. He had one last desperate act of atonement to perform. Through a series of discreet inquiries, he found out about Serafina's high-risk delivery. Consumed by a terror he now understood, he used the last of his influence not for himself, but for her. He contacted the world's leading neonatal cardiac specialist, a doctor in Zurich, and paid an astronomical, anonymous fee to have him on standby, ready to fly to Maine on a private jet at a moment's notice, just in case the baby inherited any cardiac weakness. It was a prayer whispered into the void, a desperate, selfless act from a man who knew he had no right to even ask for a miracle. 6 months later, the Brooklyn Heights brownstone was no longer a dream. It was a home. Sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint had replaced the smell of decay. Serafina, with baby Hope strapped to her chest, directed a team of restoration experts, her passion for architecture rekindled, her voice confident and clear. Her heart had stabilized after the delivery. The strain lifted. Mahara called it a miracle of medicine and maternal will. Serafina was still on medication, still monitored, but she was alive and thriving. She was a mother, a business owner overseeing the restoration, a woman reborn from the ashes of her old life. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she sat on a bench in the park across the street, gently rocking Hope's stroller, she saw him. Dominic stood at the edge of the park, looking not at her, but at the brownstone. He was a different man. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn jacket. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, even from a distance, held a clarity she'd never seen. He saw her watching and hesitated, as if ready to bolt. Then, taking a deep breath, he walked towards her, stopping a respectful 10 feet away. "Serafina," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its commanding tone. "Dominic." She kept her own voice neutral, her hand resting protectively on the stroller. "The house, it looks beautiful," he said, his gaze returning to the building. "You're bringing it back to life." The metaphor hung in the air between them. "That was the plan," she said simply. An awkward silence fell, filled only by the rustling of leaves and the distant city sounds. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he began, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were filled with a profound, desolate sorrow. "And I know an apology is an insult for what I did. It's a word, and I dealt in actions. But I am sorry, Serafina, for the slap, for the years of cruelty, for being a coward who was so afraid of his own heart that he tried to break yours. I'm sorry I endangered you. And her." He glanced at the stroller, his voice cracking. He took a step back, as if to prove he wasn't a threat. "I don't want anything. I don't ask for forgiveness. I forfeited that. I wanted to see, for myself, that you were both okay. And I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be a man who is worthy of being her father, even if it's just on a piece of paper." Serafina looked at him, at this broken, rebuilt man. The rage she had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber understanding. She thought of the anonymous doctor, a fact her lawyer had uncovered and shared with her weeks ago. She thought of the house, the trust, actions. She would never be his wife again. The trust, the intimacy, the love that was shattered beyond repair. But her daughter deserved more than a monster for a father. She deserved the man who was standing before her now, the one who had clawed his way out of the darkness. "She has your eyes," Serafina said softly. Dominic's breath hitched. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. "Once a month," Serafina said, her voice firm, setting a boundary. "We can meet here, in the park. You can see her. We'll see how it goes." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning. A fragile, tentative, and realistic new beginning, built not on a grand romance, but on the hard-won ashes of betrayal and the quiet, demanding promise of redemption. Serafina turned the stroller and walked toward her new home. A free woman, a strong mother, leaving Dominic in the autumn sunlight to take his first step on the long, slow road back to humanity. The journey from a gilded cage to a life of authentic freedom is never easy. Serafina's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest souls. She didn't just survive. She rediscovered her purpose, her strength, and her voice. Dominic, stripped of everything, was forced to confront the monster within and begin the arduous process of becoming a man. Their story isn't about a fairy tale ending, but about the gritty, painful, and ultimately hopeful reality of redemption and new beginnings. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to find solid ground. In a ballroom dripping with diamonds and disdain, a billionaire's cruel dare was about to backfire spectacularly. He thought he was making a fool of a young waitress, a ghost serving champagne to the city's elite. What he didn't know was that he was challenging a queen in hiding. This is the story of how one woman's hidden talent turned a moment of public humiliation into a legend that would echo far beyond those gilded walls. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our global audience. Maya Park moved through the chaos with the practiced invisibility of a ghost. Her world was a blur of outstretched hands, empty glasses, and the polite, dismissive murmurs of the city's elite. The weight of the silver tray she carried was a familiar ache in her wrist, a grounding sensation in a room that felt untethered from reality. Each step on the plush, crimson carpet was measured, her black uniform a stark contrast to the jewel-toned gowns and bespoke suits that surrounded her. She was a shadow in a world of blinding light. The St. Regis Grand Ballroom was a masterpiece of Gilded Age opulence. Its soaring ceiling was adorned with frescoes of mythical figures dancing in celestial clouds, and the chandeliers, each a constellation of hand-cut crystal, cast a warm, honeyed glow over the assembled guests. Laughter, brittle and sharp, echoed off the marble columns as conversations ebbed and flowed, a symphony of stock options, summer yachts, and political connections. Maya heard it all, but none of it was for her. Her job was to anticipate a need before it was voiced, to be a silent, efficient cog in the grand machine of the evening. Yet, even in her self-imposed anonymity, there was a grace to her movements that belied her station. When she navigated a tight space between two gossiping socialites, her body didn't just squeeze through, it flowed, her shoulders angling with an unconscious elegance. As she set down a flute of champagne, her fingers didn't just release the glass, they extended with a delicate precision, a subtle flourish that went unnoticed by everyone, but was ingrained in her muscle memory. It was the ghost of a different life, a life where her movements were not for service, but for art. Years ago, those same muscles had been trained for the ocho, the giro, the dramatic pause of a tango. She and her partner, Marco, had been rising stars in the competitive dance world, their chemistry on the floor a fiery, unspoken language. They had dreamed of Buenos Aires, of winning the Mundial de Tango, of a life lived in the passionate embrace of the music. But dreams were fragile things, easily shattered by the harsh realities of life. Her mother's illness, the mountain of medical bills, and Marco's decision to find a partner with better financial prospects had brought her world crashing down. The dance shoes were packed away, the posters of tango legends taken down, and the fire in her soul banked to a low, smoldering ember. Survival had become the only dance that mattered. A sudden, sharp voice cut through her reverie. "Waitress, over here." Maya turned, her face a mask of polite neutrality. A man with a florid face and a strained tuxedo gestured impatiently. "Another round for the table, and be quick about it." "Of course, sir," she murmured, collecting the empty glasses. She didn't look him in the eye. Eye contact invited conversation, and conversation led to questions. She had learned early on that people like this didn't want to see the person behind the uniform. They wanted a function, a service, a pair of hands. To them, she was no different from the silver tray she carried. As she made her way back to the service station, she passed the small stage where a pianist, a man with kind eyes and silver hair named Mr. Romano, played a gentle, meandering melody. His music was the soul of the evening, a warm current beneath the chilly surface of the crowd's chatter. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of one artist to another, though he couldn't possibly know her secret. Maya felt a strange pang in her chest, a flicker of the girl she used to be. She loaded her tray with fresh glasses, the clinking sound a stark rhythm against the pianist's soft chords. As she turned to re-enter the fray, her gaze was drawn to the center of the room. A circle had formed, and at its heart was Marcus Mercer. She recognized him from the society pages, a young, brutally successful investor known for his Midas touch in the markets and his callous treatment of those he deemed beneath him. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, with eyes the color of ice and a smirk that seemed permanently etched onto his lips. He held court, his voice a confident baritone that sliced through the ambient noise, his friends hanging on his every word, their laughter a chorus of sycophants. Maya instinctively steered clear of his orbit. Men like Marcus Mercer were black holes, their gravity immense and destructive. They consumed everything around them, leaving a void in their wake. She had seen it before, the casual cruelty, the dismissal of others as mere props in the grand theater of their own lives. Her focus narrowed to her task: deliver the drinks, retrieve the empties, and fade back into the wallpaper. It was a simple mantra, a shield against the indignity of her position. But as she approached the table near Mercer's circle, she couldn't help but overhear his bored, cutting words, and she felt a cold premonition snake its way up her spine. The night was about to change. The ghost in the ballroom was about to be seen. Marcus Mercer was profoundly, exquisitely bored. He leaned against a marble pillar, a glass of vintage scotch swirling in his hand, the amber liquid catching the light like a trapped sunset. The gala, with its predictable pageantry and recycled conversations, felt less like a celebration and more like a cage. A gilded, exquisitely decorated cage, but a cage nonetheless. He saw the same faces he saw at every other charity function, heard the same insipid flattery, and felt the same gnawing emptiness that wealth had failed to fill. The deal for the Argentinian solar firm is a lock, his friend, a sycophantic hedge fund manager named Leo, was saying. You played it perfectly, Marcus, a masterstroke. Marcus offered a non-committal shrug. It was obvious. Their CEO was desperate. Desperation is a currency, I understand. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the smoky peat flavor doing little to quell his restlessness. He surveyed the room, his icy gaze sweeping over the preening guests. He saw them not as people, but as assets and liabilities. The mayor, schmoozing by the bar, an asset. The aging heiress with her third facelift, a liability. It was a game, a simple calculation of power and influence, and he had mastered it. But winning a game you designed was, in the end, a hollow victory. He was looking for a disruption, a crack in the polished veneer of the evening. His eyes scanned past the clusters of designer gowns and settled, for a moment, on one of the waitstaff. A young woman, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, moved with an unusual fluidity. There was a precision in her posture, a control in her movements that seemed out of place with her menial task. She was just another prop, yet something about her, her quiet dignity, her complete lack of interest in the spectacle around her, pricked at his ego. She was in his world, but not of it, and that, to Marcus, felt like a small act of rebellion. "Look at them," he said, a note of contempt creeping into his voice. He gestured vaguely with his glass toward the catering staff moving along the perimeter. "They move through this world, serve us our food, our drinks, but they'll never be a part of it. They're just scenery." "Well, someone has to pour the champagne," another friend, Chloe, chimed in, her laughter tinkling like ice in a glass. "But do they have to be so bland?" Marcus countered, his boredom now curdling into a specific, targeted irritation. His gaze fell back on Maya as she placed a drink on a nearby table. "There's no spark, no ambition. They just exist." The idea began to form in his mind, a casual, cruel whim born of immense privilege and a desperate need for entertainment. He wanted to provoke a reaction, to shatter the placid surface of the night and remind everyone, including himself, of the power he wielded. He could make things happen. He could turn a person into a spectacle. He pushed himself off the pillar and strolled toward the center of the room, his friends trailing behind him like pilot fish. His voice, deliberately loud, cut through the surrounding conversations, causing a ripple of attention to spread outward. "I'm bored," he announced, a theatrical sigh in his voice. "This party needs something real, something authentic." He picked up an unused place card from a table, folding it neatly in half. He held it up, catching the light. It looked like a betting slip, a proclamation. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room and landed directly on Maya, who was just turning away from a table, her tray now empty. She was on her way back to the kitchens, back to the invisibility he so disdained. He wouldn't allow it. "You," he called out, his voice booming with artificial authority. Maya froze, her back to him. She hoped for a split second that he was addressing someone else, anyone else. But the sudden quiet that descended on their section of the ballroom told her otherwise. Slowly, she turned, her face impassive, her hands clasped behind her back. Marcus's smirk widened. He saw her now, not as a ghost, but as a target. He saw the flicker of apprehension in her eyes, and it thrilled him. This was the disruption he had been craving. He was about to stage a play, and he had just found his unwilling star. The king of the gilded cage was about to rattle the bars, not to escape, but to prove that everyone and everything inside was his to command. He relished the feeling of control, the power to turn a human being into a diversion. A brief, amusing anecdote for the ride home. The silence that had fallen around Marcus Mercer's circle began to expand, a pool of quiet spreading across the ballroom floor. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The gentle melody from Mr. Romano's piano seemed to hang in the air, suddenly exposed and fragile. Everyone was watching. Maya stood rooted to the spot, the collective gaze of the room, a physical weight pressing down on her. Marcus's eyes were locked on hers, a predatory gleam in their icy depths. He took a deliberate step closer, holding up the folded place card as if it were a royal decree. The small crowd of his friends parted for him, their faces a mixture of sycophantic amusement and mild curiosity. "You," he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "You walk through here as if you're made of glass, as if you don't want to be seen. I think it's because you know you don't belong here." A nervous titter ran through his entourage. Maya's jaw tightened, but her expression remained a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She had faced worse than a rich man's ego. She had held her mother's hand as she faded away, had packed her dreams into a cardboard box, had learned to survive on the scraps of a life that was supposed to be so much more. His words were just noise, but, Marcus continued, raising his voice for dramatic effect, "I believe in opportunity. I'm a philanthropist, after all." He gestured grandly at the gala around them. "So, I'm going to give you a chance to prove you have a spark of life in you." He paused, letting the suspense build. He was a showman, and the ballroom was his stage. He looked directly at Maya, his smirk twisting into a cruel, challenging grin. "I will make you a proposal," he boomed, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear. "Right here, right now. Forget the canapes and the champagne. I want you to dance the tango." A wave of confused murmur swept through the onlookers. Tango? Why tango? It was so specific, so random. Marcus's eyes glinted. He had no idea if she could dance. That wasn't the point. The point was the impossibility, the humiliation of the demand. He was asking a waitress, a nobody, to perform for her supper in the most extravagant way imaginable. The murmur swelled into disbelieving laughter. Leo, his friend, guffawed loudly. "The tango, Marcus. Where did that come from?" "It's a dance of passion," Marcus said, his gaze never leaving Maya. "I want to see if there's any passion behind that blank little uniform. So here's the dare." He brandished the place card. "Dance the tango for us, right now. And if you can do it, if you can show this room and me a single moment of genuine, breathtaking art, I'll marry you." The laughter that erupted this time was a tidal wave. It was loud, unrestrained, and deeply cruel. The proposal wasn't real. It was a punchline. He wasn't offering her a future. He was offering her ridicule. He was turning her into a joke, a piece of live entertainment for his jaded friends. The idea was absurd. The billionaire and the waitress, bound by a dance. It was a fairy tale twisted into a mockery. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pierced through Maya's carefully constructed armor. Her cheeks burned. She could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. The laughter was a physical assault, each peal a small stone thrown at her dignity. Her first instinct was to flee, to turn and walk away, head held high, and disappear back into the kitchens. She could quit on the spot. She could melt back into the shadows and forget this ever happened. It was the sensible thing to do, the self-preservation she had honed over years of hardship. But then, something else stirred within her. A deep, dormant anger. He had, by sheer cruel coincidence, chosen the one thing that had once defined her. The tango. Her art. Her soul. He was using it as a weapon to mock her, to put her in her place. He thought it was an impossible task, a random, demeaning command. He had no idea that he had just handed her a sword. The laughter began to subside, replaced by an expectant hush. What would the waitress do? Would she cry? Would she run? The moment stretched, thick with tension. Maya's eyes flickered from Marcus's smug face to the pitying and amused expressions of the crowd. Then, she looked toward the stage, where Mr. Romano, the pianist, was watching her with an intense, curious expression. He had stopped playing. Her mind was a battlefield. The sensible part of her screamed to escape. Don't give them the show they want. Don't let them break you. But another voice, a voice she hadn't heard in years, whispered from a place of deep, wounded pride. This is not his to tarnish. This is yours. Show them. The muscle memory in her calves, in the arch of her foot, in the line of her spine, began to call to her. The phantom sensation of a partner's hand on her back, the memory of the music swelling, the feeling of commanding a floor, it was all there, buried, but not gone. He thought he was mocking her with the tango. But the tango was her home. Slowly, deliberately, Maya unclasped her hands. She took a step forward, her eyes finding the empty silver tray she had left on a nearby service stand. With a calm, measured movement, she walked over and set it down. The simple, metallic clink echoed in the silent room. It was a sound of decision, a sound of acceptance. She turned back to face the center of the floor. She wasn't fleeing, she was stepping forward. The moment Maya set down the tray, a profound shift occurred in the ballroom's atmosphere. The residual snickers died in people's throats, replaced by a collective, held breath. Her simple action was not one of subservience, but of declaration. It was the shedding of a skin, the quiet, deliberate removal of the uniform's symbolic weight. She was no longer a waitress. In that single, silent gesture, she had accepted the terms of a battle she hadn't chosen, but which she now intended to win. Marcus Mercer's smirk faltered for the first time. He had expected tears, a panicked retreat, or at the very least, a stammered refusal. He had not expected this quiet, defiant composure. He had intended to make a fool of her, but her unnerving poise was beginning to make him feel like a bore. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a renewed air of arrogance. He gestured to the open floor with a magnanimous sweep of his hand, as if granting her a great privilege. "The stage is yours," he said, his voice a little too loud in the silent room. Maya ignored him. Her focus had turned inward, shutting out the gawking faces and the oppressive opulence of the room. She was closing a door on the world of service and opening one to a place she hadn't visited in a long, long time. Her mind was a whirlwind of memories, the scent of floor wax in her first dance studio, the feel of worn leather on her first pair of tango shoes, the sound of her father's proud encouragement, and Marco's face, handsome and intense, as he led her through a complex figure, their bodies moving as one. A pang of old grief and betrayal shot through her, but she pushed it down. That was the past. This was now. She took a deep breath, letting it center her. Her shoulders, which had been perpetually hunched in a posture of deference, squared. Her spine lengthened, and her chin lifted. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. She was no longer a servant trying to make herself small. She was a performer, claiming her space. Her eyes lifted and found Mr. Romano at the piano. He had been watching the entire exchange, his hands resting on the ivory keys, his expression one of deep, empathetic curiosity. He was not one of them. He was a musician, an artist. He understood the sanctity of performance and the ugliness of what Marcus was attempting. In their shared gaze, a silent communication passed. She gave him the barest of nods, a flicker of an eyelash, a request, and a promise. Mr. Romano understood. He didn't need sheet music. He didn't need a request. He sensed the moment, the raw, unfolding drama before him, and he knew what it required. It did not need a flashy, upbeat show tune. It needed something with soul, with history, with a touch of sorrow and a core of defiance. His fingers, long and elegant, drifted over the keys. He began not with a melody, but with a single, haunting chord. It was a minor chord, low and resonant, that seemed to rise from the floorboards and fill the vast space of the ballroom. The The note hung in the air, vibrating with a profound melancholy that instantly silenced the last vestiges of idle chatter. It was the sound of a story about to be told, a lament and a challenge all in one. Then, slowly, he began to play. It was Astor Piazzolla's Oblivion. A tango, yes, but not the fiery, aggressive tango of popular imagination. This was a tango nuevo, a piece steeped in longing, nostalgia, and a quiet, heartbreaking beauty. The melody unfolded, slow and deliberate, a walking bass line creating a pulse like a steady, sorrowful heartbeat. It was the music of memory, of loss, of a spirit that refuses to be extinguished. The choice of music was a stroke of genius. It denied Marcus the spectacle of a flashy, crowd-pleasing performance. It demanded introspection. It created a space of reverence, not ridicule. The crowd, which had been ready to mock a clumsy, amateurish attempt at a dance, was now disarmed, drawn into the music's somber, captivating embrace. As the first few bars of the piano filled the room, Maya closed her eyes. She let the music wash over her, let it find the dormant places in her soul. She could hear the bandoneon, the violin, the cello, even though they were not there. In her mind, the full orchestra was playing. The music was a key, unlocking a part of herself she had kept imprisoned for 5 years. She took her first step. It was not a dance step, but a simple, grounded placement of her foot on the polished parquet floor. Then another. She was not yet dancing, but feeling the floor, reacquainting herself with the foundation upon which she had once built her dreams. The awkward, sensible shoes of her uniform felt clumsy, wrong, but she would not let them hinder her. The dance was not in the shoes, it was in the soul. With the haunting melody as her guide, she raised her arms, not to an invisible partner, but to the music itself. Her hands, which had spent the evening carrying trays, now sculpted the air with a fluid grace. The crisis of choice was over. The humiliation was forgotten. The waitress was gone. In her place stood a dancer, poised on the edge of a performance that would be both an exorcism and a reclamation. As the mournful notes of oblivion filled the ballroom, Maya began to move. Her first steps were a slow, deliberate caminata, a tango walk. Her sensible work shoes made no sound on the floor, but the intensity of her movement created its own percussion. Each step was a liquid pour of weight from one foot to the other, her hips swaying in a subtle, controlled counterpoint to her upper body. It was the walk of a predator, of a queen, of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. The crowd watched, mesmerized. The woman they had seen moments before, the meek, invisible waitress, had vanished. In her place was a figure of mesmerizing power and grace. Her posture was impeccable, her spine a rigid, elegant line from which her limbs flowed with a startling fluidity. Her gaze was distant, fixed on a point in the middle distance, as if she were dancing with a memory, a ghost only she could see. Marcus Mercer stood frozen, his arrogant smirk completely gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. This was not what he had orchestrated. He had expected a clumsy, embarrassing spectacle that would affirm his superiority. Instead, he was witnessing a metamorphosis, an act of genuine, breathtaking artistry that was completely out of his control. The power dynamic in the room had inverted. He was no longer the director of the show. He was just another member of the audience, and a small, insignificant one at that. Maya's body became a vessel for the music's story. As the piano's melody swelled with longing, her arms swept upwards, her hands carving delicate shapes in the air, fingers extended, as if caressing an absent partner's face. She executed a slow, sinuous ocho, her feet tracing a figure 8 on the floor, her hips swiveling with a precision that was both hypnotic and deeply sensual. It was a movement of pure muscle memory, refined by thousands of hours of practice, now resurrected from its long slumber. She danced alone, but she did not look lonely. She was both leader and follower, question and answer. Her upper body remained still and poised, the famous tango torso, while her legs and feet told a story of passion, conflict, and release. She performed a gancho, her leg hooking sharply and momentarily around an invisible leg, a gesture of playful aggression. Then, a fluid giro, a series of smooth, rapid turns that made her simple black skirt flare around her, a fleeting echo of a proper tango dress. Mr. Romano, at the piano, watched her with tears welling in his eyes. He played with a newfound sensitivity, his fingers no longer just striking keys, but responding to her every move. He followed her rhythm, her pauses, her emotional crescendos. It was a duet, a conversation between musician and dancer, a collaboration of two artists who had found each other across a crowded, unseeing room. He softened the tempo when she held a pose, her body a sculpture of elegant tension, and added a touch of urgency when she moved into a faster sequence of footwork. The whispers in the crowd had long since died. The silence was absolute, reverent. People had forgotten their champagne, their conversations, their own self-importance. They were witnessing something raw and true, a soul laid bare through movement. A woman with a hardened, cynical expression, one of Marcus's own circle, unconsciously lifted a hand to her chest, her eyes wide with wonder. A gruff, elderly businessman, who hadn't been impressed by anything all night, leaned forward in his chair, captivated. Maya danced through the pain of her past. The memory of Marco's betrayal fueled a sharp, staccato footwork sequence, her feet tapping out a rhythm of anger and defiance. The sorrow of her mother's death flowed into a deep, lingering backbend, her body an arc of grief held in perfect, heartbreaking balance. But through it all, there was an undercurrent of resilience, of an unbreakable spirit. This was not a dance of defeat, it was a dance of survival. It was a declaration that even after the fire of life had burned her down, the embers of her passion still glowed, and could, with a single breath, be fanned back into a flame. As the music reached its melancholic climax, Maya executed her final movement. It was a simple, yet profoundly powerful pose. She stood in profile, one leg extended back, her arms reaching forward into the empty space where a partner should have been. Her head was thrown back, her throat exposed, her eyes closed. It was a pose of utter vulnerability and immense strength, of longing and of self-possession. She held it, perfectly still, as Mr. Romano played the final fading chord. The note hung in the air, echoing the first chord he had played, bringing the story full circle. For a suspended, breathless beat, the entire ballroom was frozen in time. There was only the image of the dancer, bathed in the golden light of the chandeliers, her heart, her history, and her art offered up for all to see. The ghost had become a fire. The final soft note from the piano evaporated into the vast, silent space of the ballroom. For a full 3 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint, collective sigh of 100 people breathing out at once. The image of Maya, frozen in her final, poignant pose, was seared into their minds. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated art, a lightning strike of truth in a room built on artifice. Then the spell broke. It started with a single person, not one of the wealthy socialites or powerful investors, but one of the other waiters, standing by the service entrance, who began to clap, his hands making a sharp, solitary sound. He was followed by Mr. Romano, who rose from his piano bench, his face etched with profound admiration, and added his own applause. Then, like a dam breaking, the sound erupted. The applause was not polite. It was not the gentle rhythmic clapping of a satisfied gala audience. It was thunderous, explosive, a roar of appreciation and awe that shook the crystal chandeliers. It was a visceral, emotional response to the courage and talent they had just witnessed. People were on their feet, their faces alight with an emotion Marcus Mercer had sought all night and failed to create. Genuine excitement. The room, which had been cold and sterile, was now filled with a palpable warmth, a shared human experience that transcended wealth and status. Maya slowly lowered her arms and brought her feet together. She opened her eyes, a little dazed, as if returning from a great distance. The roar of the applause washed over her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Not triumph, not pride, but a quiet, overwhelmed gratitude. She had not danced for them, but for herself. Yet, their response was a balm on old wounds, a validation she hadn't known she needed. She did not curtsy or bow grandly. She simply offered a modest, dignified nod of her head, first to the audience, and then, with more meaning, to Mr. Romano at the piano. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of their shared masterpiece. Then, turning her back on the standing ovation, she did the most shocking thing of all. She walked back to the service stand, picked up her empty silver tray, and headed toward the kitchens. She returned to her job. The applause faltered, then died away, replaced by a ripple of stunned, excited whispers. The conversations that resumed were not about stocks or yachts. They were about her. Who was that? Did you see her footwork? Absolutely professional. I can't believe Marcus Mercer. What an oaf. He thought he was mocking her. The narrative of the evening had been stolen from its host. Marcus stood alone in the center of the floor, the epicenter of an event that was no longer about him. The laughter he had orchestrated had been transformed into applause for his intended victim. He had been rendered irrelevant, a footnote in the story of the waitress who could dance like a fallen angel. His face was a mask of pale, humiliated fury. He had been unmasked not by a rival or a market crash, but by a quiet woman with a hidden fire. He had tried to expose her as small, and in doing so had revealed his own pathetic pettiness to the entire room. As Maya pushed through the swinging doors into the bright, chaotic world of the hotel kitchen, the roar of the ballroom was replaced by the clatter of plates and the shouts of chefs. Her fellow servers stared at her, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. "Maya, are you okay?" One of them, a kind girl named Sophia, asked. "We heard the commotion." "I'm fine," Maya said, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling slightly. She set her tray down on the metal counter. The simple, solid object felt real, grounding. Before she could process what had just happened, the ballroom door swung open again. A woman with an elegant silver bob and a chic, understated dress approached her. She was not one of Marcus's crowd. Her eyes held a keen intelligence and warmth. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Ana Duarte. That was one of the most moving things I have ever seen." Maya, still reeling, could only manage a quiet, "Thank you." "I run a small dance studio in the village," Ana continued, handing Maya a simple business card. "Duarte Dance. We're nothing fancy like this," she said with a small smile. "But we have heart. I'm looking for a new tango instructor for our adult beginners class. The pay isn't much, but the students are wonderful. Please, think about it." Maya took the card. Its crisp edge, a tangible piece of a future she hadn't dared to imagine moments before. I will. Thank you." Ana nodded and slipped away as quietly as she had arrived. Maya stared at the card, the name Duarte Dance seeming to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights of the kitchen. A door had opened. A path, long overgrown, had been cleared. She looked down at her own hands. They were trembling, not from fear or humiliation, but from the thrum of life, the remembered feeling of the music flowing through her. The echo of the applause still rang in her ears, but it was Ana Duarte's quiet offer that resonated in her soul. It wasn't a proposal of marriage from a billionaire, but a simple job offer from a kindred spirit. And it was infinitely more valuable. The days that followed the gala were a study in contrasts. By day, Maya was still the quiet, efficient waitress at the St. Regis, her movements precise as she navigated the hotel's upscale restaurant. She continued to wear her simple black uniform, to keep her eyes downcast, and to answer to waitress. She needed the job, the steady paycheck a non-negotiable reality of her life. Some of the hotel staff looked at her differently, with a new respect and a hint of awe. But Maya deflected their questions with a quiet modesty. The dance had been a moment out of time, a fever dream. Now, it was back to the reality of making rent. But by evening, she was someone else entirely. After her first nervous phone call, she had met Ana Duarte at the small, unassuming studio in Greenwich Village. It was nothing like the grand ballrooms she had once competed in. The space smelled of lemon-scented floor polish and honest sweat. The walls were lined with slightly fogged mirrors and posters of dance legends, the very same ones that had once adorned her bedroom walls. It felt, immediately and overwhelmingly, like coming home. Her first class was a motley crew of students. There was a young couple, clearly in love, who kept tripping over each other's feet and laughing. There was a retired accountant named Arthur, a widower who confessed that his late wife had always wanted to learn the tango, and there was a trio of college students who had seen a video of her dance from the gala, which had, to her horror, gone viral on social media. "Are you really her?" one of the students asked, her eyes wide. "The woman who danced for the billionaire?" Maya felt a flush of discomfort. "I just danced," she said simply. "That's all. Now, let's talk about the embrace. The tango is not about your arms. It is a conversation that begins with the chest." She poured herself into teaching. She found a deep, unexpected joy in guiding Arthur through his first hesitant steps, in seeing the young couple finally nail a basic ocho, in watching the students' initial awkwardness melt away into a budding confidence. She was helping them find what she had lost, a way to feel alive, to communicate without words, to find grace in their own bodies. She was not just teaching steps, she was teaching connection. By evening, she was not a waitress, she was a teacher, an artist. She was Maya. About a week after the gala, as she was polishing silverware after the lunch rush, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up and her heart seized. It was Marcus Mercer. He was dressed in an expensive, tailored suit, but he looked deeply uncomfortable, stripped of his usual entourage and arrogant swagger. He clutched a bouquet of roses so tightly his knuckles were white. They were the most expensive, long-stemmed roses money could buy, and they looked utterly ridiculous in the sterile environment of the restaurant. "Miss Park," he began, his voice stiff, "I believe I owe you an apology." Maya slowly placed the fork she was holding onto the linen cloth. She stood up, not out of deference, but to meet him at eye level. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her tone polite but cool. "That night, my behavior was uncalled for," he stammered, clearly unused to admitting fault. "It was a joke, a stupid dare. I never expected you to be a professional." "I'm not a professional," she corrected him quietly. "Not anymore." "Right. Well, regardless, it was magnificent. The whole city is talking about it." He thrust the roses at her. "Please accept these. And I'd like to make good on my proposal. Not the marriage part, obviously," he added with a nervous laugh. "That was just theater. But I want to help you. I could set you up. A benefactor. Your own studio. Anything you want. Consider it my way of making amends." Maya looked at the roses, then back at his face. She saw not malice, but a profound and pathetic incomprehension. He still thought this was a transaction. He believed her dignity was a commodity he could buy back with money and flowers after trying to strip it from her for sport. He was trying to reassert control, to become the benefactor of the talent he had failed to humiliate, thereby making her success part of his own story. She gave him a small, sad smile. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Mercer, but I have to decline." He was flabbergasted. "Decline? Why?" "This is a huge opportunity. I'm offering you a career." "I'm already building one," she said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. She thought of Arthur's proud smile, of the young couple's laughter. "And as for your apology, you didn't humiliate me that night. You revealed yourself. The only person you owe an apology to is yourself, for thinking that your power gives you the right to treat people like props in your own boring play." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were calm, precise, and they landed with the force of a physical blow. Marcus's face paled. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, his money and status had failed him. He was being dismissed, not with anger, but with a clarity that was far more cutting. "My worth isn't yours to validate," Maya said, her final words a quiet affirmation of the truth she had reclaimed on the dance floor. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Without another glance at him or his expensive, meaningless roses, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the restaurant. She had faced her antagonist not with fury, but with a calm self-possession that was more powerful than any outburst. She didn't need him as a benefactor. She had found a different kind of partner, in Anna, in her students, and most importantly, in herself. The story of the waitress who danced at the St. Regis Gala became a quiet, persistent legend in the city. The viral video, grainy and shot on a phone, was dissected and shared, but it only captured a fraction of the magic. The true story lived in the whispers, in the way people talked about it. It wasn't a celebrity scandal or a piece of high society gossip. It was something more human, a modern fable about dignity and hidden talent. Maya Park became a symbol, not of overnight success, but of something far more profound, the enduring power of a person's inner light. She never quit her job at the hotel. To the surprise of many, she found a strange comfort in the routine, in the humility of the work. It kept her grounded, a constant reminder of where she had come from and the life she was carefully, deliberately building for herself. The work no longer felt demeaning because she knew it was not the sum of who she was. It was just a job. Her identity was no longer defined by her uniform, but by the life she lived outside of it. Her colleagues treated her with a quiet reverence, and even the hotel guests who recognized her seemed to look at her with a new respect. The ghost in the ballroom now had a face and a name. Her classes at Duarte Dance flourished. Anna, seeing Maya's incredible gift for teaching, gave her more hours. She started a children's class on Saturdays, a chaotic, joyful affair filled with giggling kids attempting their first tango steps. She taught retirees who wanted to reconnect with their bodies and stressed-out professionals who found an hour of focused, nonverbal communication to be the best therapy imaginable. She taught them that tango wasn't just about seduction or fancy footwork. It was about trust, balance, and listening to your partner. It was a metaphor for life. One evening, after a particularly rewarding class with her beginners, Arthur, the retired accountant, pulled her aside. His eyes, usually tinged with a quiet sadness, were bright. "My daughter came to visit this weekend," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I showed her the basic steps you taught me. We danced in my living room. For the first time since my wife passed, we danced." He squeezed Maya's hand. "Thank you." In that moment, Maya understood the true value of what she was doing. It was 1,000 times more meaningful than winning a competition or receiving a standing ovation from a room full of strangers. It was the quiet, profound impact of helping one person find a moment of connection and joy. This was her victory. This was her art. Months later, the St. Regis was hosting another grand charity gala. Maya was on the schedule, assigned to her usual duties. As she prepared for her shift, tying the ribbon of her apron, she caught her reflection in the polished silver of a champagne bucket. She saw her own eyes looking back, and this time, they were not empty or guarded. They were clear and calm, filled with a quiet confidence. She walked into the same ballroom, under the same crystal chandeliers. The scene was identical. The tuxedos, the gowns, the scent of lilies and money. But for Maya, everything was different. The room no longer felt oppressive or alien. It was just a room. The people were just people. Their power, their status, their judgment. It had no hold on her. As she moved through the crowd with her tray, she walked taller. Her steps were still measured and efficient, but they held the ghost of a tango walk, a subtle, ingrained grace that now came not from buried memory, but from present-day practice. She was Maya Park, a waitress, and she was Maya Park, a dancer and a teacher. The two were not in conflict. They were simply different facets of a whole, resilient person. Her light was not, and had never been, defined by their laughter or their applause. It had been there all along, an ember waiting for the courage to draw in a breath and glow again. The dare had not created her. It had only revealed what was already inside. And now, walking through the glittering ballroom, a quiet smile on her lips, she knew that light was hers to command, a steady, warm flame that no one could ever extinguish again. That single dance changed everything, not by giving Maya a fairy tale ending, but by allowing her to write her own. She discovered that true wealth isn't about status or applause. It's about the quiet dignity of a life filled with purpose. Her story reminds us that there is incredible strength hidden inside all of us, waiting for the right moment to step onto the floor. If her journey from humiliation to quiet triumph moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about the hidden heroes who walk among us. Your support helps us continue to tell stories that matter. Thank you for watching.